Fantastic. I just heard Chris say that Jim Mars is on the phone, and it's fun.
Yeah.
I was with Jim just two days ago, and we had a great time in Dallas.
Oh, great, cool. Yeah, Dallas is a fun place. It doesn't have as many awake people as Colorado does, or Santa Fe, New Mexico does. You're actually going to be in Santa Fe tomorrow, aren't you?
Yeah, well, we're in Santa Fe right now. I'm talking to you from a wonderful little guest house that we found.
Oh, wonderful.
And we spent the day driving around, just getting ourselves familiarized with the place, and what a great energy this city has got. It's absolutely fantastic. We love it here.
Oh, it really does. We were just there. What happened to my mic? There we go. We were just there last week, and it was gorgeous. And I'm thinking, do I want to live in Denver, or do I want to live over there in Santa Fe? Because it's really beautiful over there. But the Rockies are gorgeous, too. It's got a whole different type of feel to them. Over there, you've got all the mountains with the deserts. Here you have mountains with trees and life, etc. So it's hard to determine which one.
If you want solitude, I think Santa Fe would be the number one choice. But if you want lots of animals and stuff like that, and you want Denver. But what do you think, Michael?
You know what's nice about Santa Fe for us? It reminds us of some parts of South Africa. So we definitely resonate with it, and the lifestyle here is a lot closer to what we used to at home. So we love it here. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Excellent, excellent. So what are you speaking about there in Santa Fe? I know that we had talked offline a little bit about the lost city of Enkis. And I know that we've been reading about Enkis' laboratory, which was there in South Africa. So do you think that you've actually found the site where his laboratory was?
I believe so, Chris. I believe we have. Obviously, these things are not easy to prove. You need to really dig deep and find many different little pieces of clues and evidence and start pulling those together to string together some sort of a cohesive story and support a theory for this. But we've got enough evidence and enough pieces of the puzzle that certainly point very strongly in that direction. And for now, that's what I believe, and I will stick to it until somebody proves otherwise.
Well, where's this site located? I'm not really familiar with the South African region, but if I look on the map, about where can I point to?
Well, South Africa is a country at the bottom tip of Africa.
Well, no, I understand that. I mean the site where Enkis' city is.
Okay, you would go east. We've got to first define the whole city, because it's not just a one place. It seems to be scattered across South Africa and Zimbabwe in large settlements. And when I say large settlements, I mean settlements that are, some of them are 100 miles by 100 miles large. So, these are large settlements. It's larger than any urban area today. And so this is the big surprise, really. But, the whole mystery about Southern Africa is a growing, it keeps growing in mystery, and that's what I find fascinating. The more work and the more research I do, firstly it starts with discovering these millions of stone circles. Well, at first we thought there were just thousands of stone circles, and then we thought there were hundreds of thousands, and then I realized we're actually dealing with millions of circular structures that we didn't know what the origins were. And then when I started looking at some of the telltale signs and the scientific clues, I started realizing that we're dealing with something that's hundreds of thousands of years old, and not just a few thousand years old. And then you start seeing some of the Sumerian translations, and this is very important. This is where Zecharia Sitchin's work starts to become very important. And it's just a great shame that he's no longer among us, because with his huge amount of knowledge and information, I believe he would have been able to recognize many of these sites a lot quicker than I am. So I'm working through his translations and recognizing some of the sites and things that he's referring to, and being able to link those two together. So we're now finding what I believe is the physical proof and the physical evidence for this ancient civilization that was set up by the Sumerian entity Enki in southern Africa as part of this original gold mining operation on planet Earth, and the mystery and the research and the results are just getting more and more staggering.
Well, I've got to ask you, we believe in entertaining both sides of the coin and just giving everybody the floor. We had Dr. Michael Heiser on, and he made a pretty good argument as to why some of Zecharia Sitchin's translations are wrong. Have you heard about anything like that, and what would you say to some of his research?
I've heard about Michael Heiser. I haven't really read his work or studied his work. I guess I need to look at that, but I'm happy by looking at some of the translations, and I'm not sure if Heiser is saying that the translations are incorrect or whether his takeout or his interpretations are incorrect. I'm not sure. What did he have to say about that?
That, like, Annunaki doesn't actually mean from those who fell from heaven. He went into some of the semantics of the words and broke them down, but I think he came from a warped perspective, or not a warped, but a skewed perspective, from an agenda-based perspective. So, yeah, I just thought I would get your take on that. But I'm totally in agreement with what you're saying, and a lot of what Zecharia Sitchin says as well, because it makes sense that we were genetically engineered here, because we have so much of our DNA, which is quote-unquote junk DNA. We don't know where it's coming from. Scientists are saying it's junk, but it can't be junk. It's just not of this world. Yeah,
look, and there are a number of mainstream geneticists that have come out and said this. There's this geneticist by the name of Dr. Jiang or Chang, who was involved with the Human Genome Project, and he came out very blatantly and said, this is a number of years ago already, and he had a lot to say about this, actually. People can go and look him up. The Canadian newspaper, The Canadian, wrote a big article about him some time ago, probably about two years ago or so, maybe a bit more, and he actually probably even more than 2 years ago. And he came out very, very bluntly and said that most of our DNA is not of this world. And this is the guy that works with the Human Genome Project, and he was in charge, based on what the Canadian had to say, he was in charge of the junk DNA division and looking at the junk DNA and so forth. So, and then there's another interesting character that Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot interviewed. His name is Pete Peterson. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Pete Peterson, but he's a very interesting guy and quite scary to actually listen to what he has to say. When I say scary, I don't mean scary, but like realize how deep this rabbit hole goes, and how many of these secret projects the government has, and how it's just a never-ending pit of cover-ups after cover-up after cover-up. And Pete Peterson, incidentally, in his interview, referred to certain things, and then he chose not to answer certain questions because he thought it would get him into trouble. Well, the interview that he did got him into trouble in any case, and he refused to be interviewed after that again, and has seemingly disappeared off the radar. But he's a heavy weight in terms of secret government projects in genetic research, genetic engineering, in the highest level of government, going right up to the secret organizations that control the White House and so forth. And he made it very clear that 80% of our DNA is not of this world, and he says this himself in the interview. And then just recently I read a new paper that was putting, and sorry, let me just come back to Pete Peterson. Incidentally, he was the guy that in the 70s, I think already, it was in the 70s, he started a company called Cyberdyne. And do you remember the company called Cyberdyne? The name should ring a bell with people that are fans of the movie Terminator.
Right.
Exactly, because Cyberdyne was a real company, which was started by Pete Peterson. And guess what Cyberdyne was making? They were making human hybrid robots. Okay, and
Skynet as well.
Exactly. So this is the kind of level that this guy is at, and so when he starts talking to you about this stuff, your hair stands on end when you realize this is all true. All the stuff that's encoded in the movies, as you know, all the knowledge and information that we have is encoded in movies, and this goes back to the Victorian and pre-Victorian Shakespearean theatrical times. Remember that, and this is what blows my mind when you look at Shakespeare's plays. Right now, first of all, the information was not gathered by Shakespeare. A lot of people, this information we get told about Shakespeare. But I don't want to get too much into that. The whole Shakespearean era was completely dominated by, and now I have a complete block on the guy's name.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right, Michael. I mean, it's come to the point to where I watch the mainstream media as if it's fiction, and I watch a lot of these movies as if there's a lot of truth there, and it makes me wonder, do they put this information out in front of us just to laugh at us? Are people trying to give us this information to acclimate us to it? Or, I mean, what's going on? Why are they putting this information in these movies? But you're absolutely right. We do see a lot of truth in what quote-unquote science fiction.
Yeah. Francis Bacon is the guy that I was thinking about, Sir Francis Bacon, and he was the guy. I mean, he was a serious player, and I mean, he wrote and rewrote. He wrote the King James Bible, and there's some interesting clues written into it in one of the Psalms. This is what Jim Morris showed me the other day. In one of the Psalms, Francis Bacon actually codes in the word Shakespeare, broken up into shake and spear, just to show that we're in control. And the reason you said, what are they doing? Why are they putting this information in the movies, right in front of our eyes? I think that the reason for that is it probably has several answers. The first one is that they need to desensitize us to those ideas, so that when they're not new to us. Secondly, they use it as a form of control, because once they put it into a fictional movie, people will be reluctant to believe that it's true, because you say, oh, it's just a Hollywood movie. You believe in the fiction of Hollywood.
Yes.
That's a very important reason, because once it's a big Hollywood blockbuster, it's going to be very difficult for the mainstream people, the average Joe Schmo on the street, to believe that this is breakthrough, leading-edge scientific secret government projects that are so blatantly, shown to us in movies over the years, over and over again.
Hidden in plain sight.
Well, that's
hidden in plain sight. And then thirdly, the other important thing is that they've got to keep putting it into movies, because and preparing us for first contact and the time when the truth will be revealed, because somehow they're planning a continued control of the human race. If they fall too far behind in their disinformation, in their control through dogmatic belief systems, they will separate themselves. They'll create a huge gap between what the average people in the street believe consciously and from their own research, and what they're trying to shove down our throats. So they're going to constantly update and allow us more and more information, so that they don't fall too far behind where the collective consciousness lies.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Let's see, we have about a minute left until the break.
Well, we were trying to see what was on the news the other day, and all we could hear about was Obama and the whole Israel thing, and the Casey Anthony story. I mean, it's like, and that whole thing in and of itself has a lot of weird, annotations to it, Universal Studios and all that. But I don't care about that. I care about what happened to these storm victims, and what's going on with the earth changes and all this. And
yeah, I do want to get your take on all these earth changes, Michael, because we're definitely seeing them, tornadoes all over the place, tearing everything up. We've got the flooding going down the New Madrid fault line, and in South Africa as well. I want to know what the weather situation is like there, if it's completely different, etc. But we're coming up to a break, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Tellinger, our great guest, and we'll see you in about a minute or two. TruthFrequencyRadio.com. We will get into all of that here on Oracle Broadcasting.
I think 26 or 36 of them touched down in that one night, and we were actually in a restaurant in Dallas, and at one stage all the waiters and waitresses were saying, okay, we're heading for the freezer, you get under the table, and we're going, okay, well, this is interesting.
Wow, talk about customer service. Y'all get to go in the nice freezer, and we're laying here completely exposed. That's nice.
Yeah, so, but fortunately it passed us by, and I guess we were lucky. But the earth changes are a fascinating thing because, a lot of people are ascribing it to various, possible planetary alignments, Comet Elenin, as Nassim Haramein says, this brown dwarf. I'm aware of the brown dwarf that he's talking about. That was something that was picked up several years ago already as a possible source for the planet Nibiru, that maybe Nibiru was actually a brown dwarf, or it was a planet around the brown dwarf that Nassim was referring to, and various other theories about that. I do need to update myself on the latest information about that Nassim is talking about. But what I find fascinating is that we mustn't write off the fact that our authorities and the secret government departments have the technology to control global weather.
I agree. Every time we've had one of these major earthquakes, Japan, Chile, New Zealand, Haiti, etc. Well, not Haiti, but Japan.
China as well.
China as well, yes. But we've had Elenin lining up on those days. However, we've also had HARP activity on those days too, and it makes me wonder if they're using HARP to make it look as though Elenin is coming.
Yeah, you got to understand one thing, and I cannot stress this enough. Okay, if people believe that there's some form of control on us as humans, as the slave species, they need to wake up very quickly. There is not some control. There is absolute control over the humanity. Absolute control over the humans by the ruling classes, by the royal political elites that run this planet, whoever they are. And I know that Jim Mars believes that these people are not necessarily of this planet. They don't care about this planet, and this is why they're behaving like this. And this is interesting stuff because it gets complicated because, there is so much disinformation going on that you got to constantly watch yourself. And I know that you are acutely aware of this. You got to constantly watch yourself, not to just go out there blasting, oh, look what I found, because there's so much disinformation going on. And they constantly putting out information and creating, opposing bits of information to keep us. It's a Tower of Babel situation, except now it's not being done with this, destroying our language. Our language has already been destroyed, and that was the major bit of separation and segregation in humanity and dividing people so you can conquer them. That was the Tower of Babel event. Now you confuse people and you divide people by the information that you give them, and that's even more powerful. So through education and media and information and leaking out bits of information, you're constantly dividing people and confusing them and keeping them separated because they believe different things. And these are incredibly subtle and incredibly powerful tools that the Illuminati are using. And it's spectacular. So let me just make it very clear for people that are still wondering about this. There is not some control, there is absolute control. Okay, and the fact that you and I can be sitting having this discussion and this debate on this radio station is because they are allowing us to do this. When the time comes that we become enough of a threat, that will no longer happen. And it's important to understand this. And what I like to do, are you there, Chris?
Yes, yes, yes. I've always thought about that, Michael. I've always thought that maybe like the Alex Joneses and the people that are constantly perpetuating fear are actually helping them, maybe not even knowingly, but unknowingly, by putting out the fear and putting out and keeping people in a low-level state. So we try to keep it positive here. We go on the facts, but we still, the message of the moral of the story is that infinite love is the only truth. Everything else is illusion, just as David Icke says.
Yeah. And what we can add to this, and this is what I was leading up to, talking about the DNA earlier, and we didn't get there, is that no one is immune to the rise of consciousness. No one is immune to the effect of consciousness hitting us from the galactic center. Now, this might sound like, a whole lot of hogwash to a bunch of people out there, but this is, once again, this is scientifically shown and proven. And when you start dealing at the leading edge of science, it doesn't only sound like witchcraft or wizardry or science fiction. It is science fiction. It surpasses the most of the stuff that you've seen in science fiction movies on TV and Star Trek and all that. That's what we're dealing with in the leading areas of research and experiments and activity of science and secret government projects with aircraft and traveling beyond time, time travel, jump room to Mars, all these things. This is all real. It's around us, but we have all been denied this information. Now, what I mentioned is no one is immune to the rise of consciousness and the light-specific frequencies of light that activate our DNA and stimulate our DNA to higher levels of consciousness. This is a real thing that's been shown over and over again by various scientific laboratories and research. They refer to it as the phantom chromosome effect. That's one of the ways that you can refer to it. But there's another interesting geneticist by the name of William Brown. He's just written some phenomenal papers. He's a friend of Klaus Donner's in Austria. And this guy is writing about our DNA being activated, and that our DNA has 22 chakras that he discovered. 22 chakras that are activated by specific frequencies of light. So the more you look into this, the more you start hearing the same kind of information coming out. And after all we are as human beings, and all the matter around us is just consolidated light. It's congealed light manifested in the form of physical matter. Now, what's fascinating about this is that leading scientists have won Nobel Prizes for this kind of information. One guy, Paul Dirac, in 1933, won a Nobel Prize in the field of quantum physics, and one of his major theories and what he was trying to tell the world is that the whole universe comes out of a source of light. All the physical matter comes from certain frequencies of gamma ray light. So now, but that information is not what gets taught to you at school. You don't get taught that in physics. Okay? And
well, of course, they have to put the screen in front of you. They have to put the movie screen. Otherwise, they can't control you.
Yeah. So when you start talking about the physical world and the nature of reality, it gets really crazy, because the information is so beyond the average person on the street, because we have so successfully been dumbed down through our education system. And as you say, David Icke has called it a long time ago. He calls it the left brain prison system. But we can take this a lot further and actually get into some really phenomenal subtleties of how these guys, who are incredibly good at this manipulation, how they've planned this, how they've orchestrated this, how they in every level of society, they control everything. It's, Chris, what's fantastic about this research, and this is what I love about the spread of consciousness and the enlightenment field that is just taking the world by storm and waking people up all over the place. And let's just also add that this is the positive takeout that I'd like people to remember. No matter how dark the information may seem, no matter how gloomy it sounds or feels about this control and this absolute control, which it is, remember that there's only positive the only outcome is positive. There is no negative effect. And Willem de Swart, in his book Secret Numbers of God, will give you a phenomenal rundown of this no negative effect, which is fantastic. It might seem like it to you from time to time, but it is not. It's just a very short, in the space of eternity, what you're experiencing here is actually completely irrelevant. Right? Now, what's important about this is that nobody is immune to the rise of consciousness and to this light that's reaching us from the galactic center and activating our DNA. No one is immune to that. And neither are the Illuminati and those that think they control this planet for their own little playground, or whatever the real reason is that they're doing this for. And they are all waking up and being activated and seeing higher, becoming more enlightened and reaching higher levels of consciousness. And so sooner or later, all these people that are playing these games and controlling this planet will wake up and move across into the light. And that's a very important thing for us to understand. So,
well, I've got to ask you, do you think that perhaps their power comes from just us believing that they have that power?
Absolutely. And that's the other thing, is that our collective consciousness, and this is where quantum physics plays an important role in explaining to us how this works, is that the more they keep us under control, the more successful they are, the more we believe that we're under control, the more power we give them. It's like a weird double feedback mechanism that works against us. The more we find out, the more it can work against us, until we realize this thing that enlightenment and consciousness is the only thing that is the ultimate power, if you want to use that word, or the ultimate reality here. And that nobody can control you. And we can liberate ourselves through collective consciousness very quickly. So I believe as the collective consciousness rises, and it's rising very rapidly, and as we approach 2012, and I believe, and there's a very important thing, we can talk about that as well, because there's a lot of very strange stuff going on around 2012, as you know. People believe in the doom and gloom stuff, and they're building bunkers and all that kind of stuff. I believe that our collective consciousness can create a whole new reality that we may not even recognize today, as long as we remind ourselves that we can project an absolute paradise on earth and a utopian life on earth through purely just thinking about it and imagining it and visualizing it. It will become the reality. And as weird and wishy-washy and as strange and unrealistic as this may sound, these are the fundamentals of the laws of nature and the nature of reality, which we're only starting to really wrap our heads around, because it is a strange beast to come to terms with, I tell you.
Absolutely, absolutely. But what can we do as one person, though? I mean, we can focus on changing the future individually, but it comes down to the collective, doesn't it?
It does come to the collective, but remember that your thoughts as an individual affect everyone around you. So if you go to a restaurant and you look at all the people around you and you go, look at these bloody idiots, they're all living in the dark, and you project negative thoughts on them, that you're creating that reality. Although it may be intermittent or momentary or whatever. So we've got to start training ourselves, and all the people that have reached high levels of enlightenment and consciousness, we've got to be vigilant and train ourselves and stop ourselves from thinking negative thoughts and projecting anything negative around us or the people around us. Constantly projecting the thought of love and unity. And remember, it's this word unity that's so crucial in this whole thing. Remember that unity is the only thing that can exist. Only out of unity can you have infinite diversity that exists in harmony. And these are some really fundamental, important things that we need to remind ourselves of all the time. I do it. I trip myself up all the time. I look up and go, oh, look at that idiot over there. And I stop myself and go, what are you thinking? Stop that. Although the guy's behaving like an idiot, and you can see he's completely out of touch with reality. You've got to stop yourself from doing that, and you've got to start projecting these positive thoughts that will affect that person on a subconscious level, and bring them into the unity, out of which we then project the collective consciousness of unity and a positive outcome for everybody.
I completely agree. It's hard to get out of the programming. I catch myself doing that regularly as well.
And that's where the left brain prison comes in, and you realize how poisoned our minds have become, and you start realizing how advanced the masters of the past, like the Christ figure and the Krishna and the Buddha, and these ancient masters that were so enlightened and were just so close to the divine source and unity, that you can imagine how frustrated those individuals must have been with the humans around them, trying to teach them the simplicity of the divine nature and the unified field that quantum physicists are trying to find. Well, the unified field is in the consciousness. And unless you embrace the laws of nature, and this is what I'm doing with Willem de Swart in The Secret Numbers of God, and Willem has decoded this so beautifully. This is going to, I keep talking about this book, and hopefully we're going to get it out by the end of the year, but it's going to open people's minds beyond any other bit of literature that I've ever read, because it shows you the simplistic and holistic way how all of this is pulled together, and it makes absolute sense. So, yeah.
Michael, I'm getting a couple of comments here that you're fading in and out a little bit. I don't know. It sounds like the headphones or the microphone is popping out of the socket for a minute and then popping back in.
I'm not on a microphone. I'm talking through through my computer built-in speaker, so it might just be the actual connection.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm really sorry about that.
Okay, no, I mean you're coming in fine on me for me, and with the archives we have compressors and limiters and stuff, so it'll sound even on the archive. But I've gotten about 3 or 4 messages so far, so I figured I would say something. But let me ask you this: the Rh negative blood. Where do you think that comes from?
Well, clearly there's that in itself tells us that there's some huge genetic anomaly that we have not been told about, that has not been made generally known to the public, and then people and the scientists are pussyfooting around it. They don't want to address it, because once they start addressing it, the only answer to that is that part of our DNA comes from an off-world source, and very few of these geneticists are brave enough to say that.
Yeah. We've had a lot of people on the show, and I brought up the same question, and it's amazing how a lot of people don't even want to touch that topic, but I think there's something definitely there. And I've noticed that the people that we meet that are Rh negative, they seem to be more aware, or they seem to have a goal to be more aware. I'm Rh negative, Cherie is. A lot of our listeners that I've spoken to off air have said the exact same thing. Let's get more into that when we come back from break, ladies and gentlemen.
And exploding in the response and the reaction from people wherever we've been. We're doing in total 30 cities around the USA and also Canada, and very exciting for us to go to Canada for the first time. We're doing Vancouver and Montreal, but we're doing pretty much, we did Dallas and Austin last week. We've come from New York all the way down the East Coast to Florida, then across to Texas, and now we're going up and Santa Fe tomorrow. So tomorrow in Santa Fe, if you're anywhere near Santa Fe, for some strange reason I didn't write down the address and have it ready for this interview, but go onto my website, which is ZuluPlanet.com or slavespecies.com, and click on the banner for the USA tour, and that'll show you all the cities that we are touring. Or you can just go straight to the blog spot, which is michaeltellinger.blogspot.com. So it's michaeltellinger.blogspot.com, and that'll show you all the cities and the times that we're on, and the dates. We still have a long way to go. And hopefully we'll see some of the people at some of the venues that are listening. It'll be great.
Definitely. I've gotten a couple of comments of some people that saw you in Austin. They said the presentation was fantastic. We may drive down to Santa Fe tomorrow and check out the lecture because I'd really love to see that. You have a couple of books out there too, don't you? And where can people find those?
Yeah, a lot of the bookstores in the USA carry them. I know Borders and Barnes & Noble carry my books. They're not always in stock, so you might have to ask for it. So it's Slave Species, and then Slave Species of God, my first book, and then Adam's Calendar, my second book, and then the most recent book called Temples of the African Gods, all dealing with the ancient ruins and the ancient civilizations of Southern Africa. And then, otherwise go on to Zulu Planet, zuluplanet.com, and you can order the books there, and we send them worldwide. And and also obviously Amazon carries the books as well. Yeah, once again, it becomes a very interesting debate, and I've become a lot more careful in more recent times to just jump into that pond and start throwing out, my thoughts and theories on it, because first of all, the symbol of the serpent becomes more mysterious the more you look at it, and you start realizing the serpent is linked to the cosmic egg and represents the universal creation, which has a feminine source, and it's often represented by the serpent because the serpent comes from an egg, and in many of the depictions you see the serpent entwined around the egg. But what's important, and then it's also encoded in the creation story, and the symbol of Enki, the medical caduceus is the entwined serpent, the two entwined serpents with the wings. So these symbols and the information is so deeply encoded with mysterious knowledge and information that you start to wonder why this information and who are the people behind it, or the individuals behind it that have encoded this information, and for what reasons. And it gets more and more mysterious and more interesting, because just like words and sounds carry frequencies and energies, symbols carry frequencies and energies attached to them. So if you draw a symbol or carve a symbol into rock, you have captured an energy linked to that in perpetuity, because now you've got that energy field carved into a rock, linked to that image that you've carved, and so it goes. So this, the junk DNA thing is certainly something that we look at as evidence of a genetic manipulation. But at the same time, it becomes a far deeper, and I believe there's a lot more information that we don't have to just be able to jump up and say, well, it's Annunaki DNA, or it's the information has been coming out from people like yourselves and other people who do these interviews, especially Project Camelot with Kerry Cassidy and the kind of people she's interviewed, that tell us that this planet has been it's been like a laboratory for extraterrestrials, where they've messed with all kinds of different cloning of humankind, of animal kind. Many of the animals and plant species that are here have been brought from other places and experimented with on this planet, and so forth. So actually, it is truly a deep and interesting debate as to where does our DNA really come from, who is the main source for it. The Sumerian tablets, however, make it very clear that the Anunnaki were the guys that created the slave species to do the gold mining. Okay, so there we have a anchor point and a very important historic event, and I for one believe at face value what is written in the Sumerian tablets, and I'll give you the very reasons why I believe that. But we have a very specific point in human history, that these beings that came to Earth in search for gold, and that couldn't dig enough and mine enough of the gold, needed help, and they created a primitive species, a primitive worker. They refer to it as the Lulu Amelu, and they created what were our early ancestors. How those early ancestors have then diversified genetically, that's where it becomes really interesting. Because clearly, if you create one genetic pool, one genetic being, that being will look the same. Like all Chinese people look Chinese. They don't suddenly come up with a black baby or a Caucasian baby or whatever. They're Chinese. It's a very strong DNA strand. Black people give birth to black children. Caucasians give birth to white children. And so it goes. And so there's clearly been a lot of genetic manipulation and experimentation and cross-pollination between different gene pools over an extended period of time.
Well, except for the royals. They go out of their way to keep the gene pool very isolated.
Absolutely. That seems to be the case as well. So, yeah, I find myself, the more I delve into this, and it's like anything else, the more complicated it becomes.
Well, you mentioned gold, and I find that very fascinating because it seems like our entire lives it's been based on on accumulating gold. Back from when money was backed by gold, when gold was used as money. Now you've got the hip hop scene, which is going bling bling, and it's all about gold and diamonds, etc. And ultimately, I think that's because it's been programmed into our DNA that we're supposed to collect this gold for the star gods.
Yeah. Look, and that's the other very important thing. All ancient cultures, there's certain things that all ancient and native populations around the world have in common. One of the common things they have is, well, I call them the Holy Trinity of the common denominators, and that is gold. You cannot separate human history from gold. And mankind's obsession with gold. Now that in itself is a very strange phenomenon. Okay? And to just put that into perspective is that, think about Adam being created, and before Eve was even created, Adam was already told by God in the Bible in Genesis 2, so God has just created the earth and all the things in it, and He's created Adam as the first human, and before He even creates Eve out of Adam's rib, He tells Adam about the fact that there's this land called Havilah, which is rich in gold. Which, you go, what kind of a psychotic God are we dealing with here? Who is this, And it's in that moment that you realize very strongly that you've got to divide the divine being, the divine creator of the universe, responsible for the creation in some mysterious way, which is confusing to us today still, and the God with a small g, which I referred to in my first book, Slave Species of God. You've got to be able to separate God with a big G and God with a small g.
Absolutely. God with the big G is energy. It's the infinite love. It's what powers the entire universe or multiverse, however many levels you want to take it. And the small G's are, of course, the ones in the Bible and religion and these beings, the Elohim and the Anunnaki, etc., that we just so foolishly worship and think that we're doing something good, and we're really not. If we can get rid of the religion and all of that, in my opinion, I think this world would be a much, much better place. And if we started paying attention to the true God, because I think, he might be a little bit upset with us that we've been ignoring him.
Yeah, remember that the divine creation has no negative side. There is no negative side. Anything negative has come out of what Gary Renard in his book, The Disappearance of the Universe, calls the belief of a momentary separation from the divine. And in that fraction of a second that you believe you can separate yourself from the Creator, you create this thing called ego. But that is a fictitious thing. It's an insane projected reality, because nothing can separate from the divine. It's impossible to separate from the divine and the positive energy that has created all this divine stuff, whatever you want to call that stuff. Right, but I'm digressing a bit. So let's come back to the Holy Trinity of things. So gold is the first one, which doesn't make any sense. And clearly these gods that you mentioned in the Bible and the global religions, these guys were the guys responsible for the punishment and the torture of human beings, and the vengeance and the judgments and all that. I mean, you listen to the Christian radio stations here through the United States. They all talk, about brimstone and fire from the sky, and God's going to come down and judge you. And if you've been bad, God will judge you, and you will burn in hell for eternity. I mean, this is dark stuff that they, pushing down on their followers. It's really awful. That is just such bad energy that they're spreading.
I completely agree. It goes back to spreading the fear, in my opinion. And I think I know the other two of the Trinity: gold, oil, and drugs. Oh, wait, no, that's the New World Order's Trinity.
Yeah, well, that's the case today. With the ancient cultures, and the other important thing, remember that all ancient cultures believe that the gold belonged to the gods. Wherever you go, gold belongs to the gods. And therefore, it becomes an interesting clue why gold became so valuable to the humans when eventually they were allowed by the gods to keep a little bit of the gold for themselves, or they stole some of it, or they kept it, unlawfully, or they, whatever the situation may have been, or they were allowed to coin some of it into coins or whatever. So when they were allowed to do that by the gods, it became extremely valuable, because up to that point, humans were not allowed to have the gold. It belonged to the gods. And this is a very important thing that we need to remind ourselves of. The other thing is the slavery, the concept of slavery. I mean, it's insane that shortly after mankind has been created and starts to live in separate sort of villages and settlements around the world, they suddenly start practicing this concept of slavery. It's completely unnatural to the natural order of things, and you've got to ask yourself, where does that idea come from? Unless it was implanted by somebody who was giving the humans this idea of slavery, and then in the Bible, this malicious God who punishes his followers, and if they don't do X, Y, and Z, he punishes them and kills them. He also allows them to take slaves and gives them instructions how to treat their slaves, how to punish and beat their slaves, and under which conditions they may actually kill their slaves. Now, this is completely, it's so far out of the divine paradigm that it can never ever be reconciled with the consciousness and the field of infinite love. And the third one is this, what you brought up earlier, is this winged serpent or the feathered serpent, the worship of the flying serpent, the winged serpent, feathered serpent. This goes back with virtually every ancient civilization. They have some sort of a ritual that's linked to the worshipping of a serpent entity. And this is weird stuff, and one needs to really think about this and work through this to understand the meanings and the symbolism in it. And I believe the symbolism is a lot deeper than we realize. Going back, I must tell you that once again, the brilliant work that Willem de Swart is doing in the Secret Numbers of God, and the reason I keep talking about it is because I'm editing the book, because Willem is a mad scientist and he's just coming up with all this incredible breakthrough stuff, but his ability to write it into a understandable English is a little bit limited, so I have to help him with that. So I constantly talk to Willem when we have these regular Skype conversations where he shares these new breakthroughs with me, and I give him some of my insights, and then he goes off and he makes new breakthroughs and so forth. But it's one of the important things is to remember that the rules of nature and the laws of nature remain constant, and whoever wrote the tarot cards or captured the knowledge and the imagery in the tarot cards, I'm talking about the major arcana of the 22 tarot cards, has all this information and knowledge. Everything that we've discussed so far and infinitely more is encoded and captured in the imagery and the information in the tarot cards. to such a level that it absolutely boggles the mind. And I cannot stress this enough. Way beyond what you've ever possibly imagined is captured in the tarot cards. And I tell you, that is another big question. Who were these people that put together the tarot cards, and why did they do this? Because, it is so filled with information and answers to all the questions that we are asking here tonight, and the theories that we're throwing out. The tarot cards seem to have all that information. So who are the people that put that together, and what was their purpose?
That's a great question, but the people now who are demonizing things like the tarot cards are the fundamentalist religious zealots. They go out of their way to get people to not look at those. If you look at those, you're bad. If you look into any of the information, you're bad. I mean, what was the first sin committed, after all, in the Bible? It was eating from the tree of knowledge. If people can't realize that they're a slave species just by that, and the God that they're worshiping is a slave master, then I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, and now what's interesting about this whole thing, and once again, we started talking about the ancient minds and civilizations and the lost city of Enkis in South Africa and Zimbabwe, and all of this that we're talking about is directly linked to those early civilizations. And the way that it's linked to it, and I need to just bring it in because, some people might be listening to us and going, okay, well, I want to hear more about the ancient gold mines and Enki and his house and the ancient civilizations. Well, there's a lot of information on that in my new book, The Lost City of Enki, will have a lot of this information. Otherwise, come catch me at one of my presentations around the USA, and you'll get a lot more information about that in a 3-hour presentation. But all of this stuff we're talking about is linked to those early settlements in southern Africa and the gold mining operations and the Anunnaki and the knowledge they had, because they left behind clues and evidence, physical clues and physical evidence of their knowledge of sacred geometry, their knowledge of the laws of nature, and how all of this stuff works with such ease and such beauty, with simplicity, that it boggles the mind. And once again, mainstream science has gone and complicated all of this stuff and confused our minds with convoluted, complicated mathematical and scientific formulas that just trip themselves up time and time again. And every major scientist or physicist that is worth their salt will be the first one to tell you, we know nothing about science and the laws of nature. We are mere observers, and we need to learn a lot more about it coming from a mainstream scientific perspective. And just because we observe something in a laboratory doesn't mean we understand it. And at least 90% of science is not understood. Experiments and things we observe, we do not understand. So it just tells you, don't think that scientists have got it all figured out. They don't. They understand very little about the nature of reality and what's really going on about us, around us.
I've got to ask you this. You talked about symbols and the powers that symbols have. And, you can take a look at the dollar bill and realize that there's a lot of symbols on there. Everywhere we turn, we see corporate symbols. We're constantly being bombarded by these talismanic words and sigils, et cetera, et cetera. But some of these ancient sites that you talk about also have this kind of energy radiating from them as well, don't they? Have you found any benefits to being around these sites?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question because ultimately this information and this research brings us back to these ancient sites in southern Africa. And I just recently heard that Sam Osmanovic, I forget how to pronounce his surname, the guy that's doing the Bosnian pyramid research, has been finding very similar results in the Bosnian pyramid with these measurements in energy fields, electromagnetic fields, and other energies that I've been finding in the ruins of South Africa. And this is phenomenal. So now we're starting to corroborate each other's results. And these are scientific readings that you cannot argue with them. They are real, they exist. We now need to start understanding what it is that they're telling us, because they're telling us, giving us readings that we don't understand that we don't use on this planet today, electronically and from frequencies perspective. So to come back to that, yes, we are now being given the knowledge and information of ancient cultures and civilizations, how they used their knowledge of sound and sound frequencies as a source of energy, how they converted that sound into advanced tools, how they amplified it to create a giant energy grid that covered the whole southern African continent, with sharing this energy that they were generating and amplifying to incredible powers that we can't even imagine today. In fact, there's one psychic lady that when I showed her some of these energy generating devices in South Africa, her immediate reaction was that, and it was within like 2 or 3 seconds, she looked at the photographs and she said, "Oh my God, these are the energy devices that caused the destruction of Atlantis." Yeah, the gods with the lower G are just advanced beings that arrived on this planet a long time ago, that have been coming and going, and the Sumerian tablets refer to them as the Anunnaki. So I think the Anunnaki would be the main group of gods with lower G, but there'll be other advanced beings from other star systems that have been coming to Earth, which you'd probably call gods with lower G as well. Several of them have tried to assert their will on the human beings and the inhabitants of this planet, and try to enslave them in various ways and make them do things, and therefore, you know, they created the whole thing of sacrifice. I mean, just read the first 5 books of the Bible and realize that we're dealing with the Elohim, the plural gods. And the word Elohim means the gods and not God. So every time, if you read the Bible, every time you read the word God, you've got to replace it with its original meaning, and that is the gods, plural. And suddenly everything changes. And when you start reading about the whole Exodus and the going through the desert and the building of the tabernacle and the instructions, the very strict instructions about how God wanted to be presented food, and how the food had to be burnt on the barbecue, you know, the burnt offerings. You know, we're talking about barbecues here, right? So you got to go and barbecue the food for God, and then you got to go through this whole process of anointing yourself and anointing the tabernacle and the Holy of Holies, and you go through the contents of the anointment oil, and you just realize that it's just all disinfectants. They're all disinfectants. That's all they are. So you make yourself clean for the gods, so you don't infect their food with your human disease and viruses, and the clear instructions on how there shouldn't be any yeast. And this was a very interesting thing for me that I found. The fact that, you know, I don't know why the Jews don't eat, bread with yeast, because from my reading the Bible, it never ever says that they should not eat bread made with yeast. The gods didn't want to eat bread with yeast, and they're very strict about it. God says that if you bring me bread made with yeast, I will kill you. And then I thought, what is this yeast? Why is yeast so big and so important? Go and do some research on yeast, and you suddenly realize that yeast has the capacity to cause genetic mutations. And I went,
I didn't know that.
Okay, well, here we go. The gods didn't want to be infected with any fungus, mold, or... Remember, yeast is just a fungus, right? So we're dealing with molds and yeasts and funguses that could be in the bread or in the food that could cause genetic mutations among the Anunnaki or the gods. And this stuff is so simple. Once you start breaking through the fear and the control and read it as it is, you realize it's just a bunch of people with advanced knowledge that were controlling lesser group of humans and make them, feed them, bring them food, prepare the food, and feed them whenever they were hungry. I mean, the fact that God says, you better put salt on my meat. If you don't put salt on my meat, I'll kill you. It's like, what? God wants salt on his meat? Well, since when does the divine being, the divine creator of the universe, first of all, when does he want a barbecue for dinner and make sure that there's salt on my meat. You start getting to those, and that's where you start to separate the God with a big G, the divine creator, and the gods with a small g, this advanced human being, or advanced beings that were manipulating and controlling the human beings that were of a very low consciousness at that stage.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we get into Atlantis, let's go to Kevin from Minnesota, one of our longtime listeners. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much, Chris. Hello, Sheree and Michael. Thank you very much for being a guest again. I always find it fascinating when you are on the program.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
A couple things that I have for you. I am of Native American descent of northern North America. On the borderline of Canada and the United States is where my ancestors hailed from, and they were called in their language the Anishinaabe. And if you look into the etymology of the word Anishinaabe, it is quite similar to Anunnaki, where it is loosely translated to the species that were lowered to the earth. And the Anishinaabe people, they had copper scrolls where they knew how to not specifically smelt copper, but they would heat copper and press it and pound it together and make these sheets, where on these sheets they would make pictographs or hieroglyphics, and then they would roll them up, and during certain ceremonies throughout the year they would unroll these and retell the tales of their scrolls. And there's allegations that this is, plus 35 up to 70,000 years ago in North America. And with that said, one question I have for you is, why is it that it is so incredibly hard to find factual information pertaining the ancient peoples of the North and South Americas?
Great question.
Yeah, look, I personally, thanks very much for that information, and it's moments like this that I really cherish, when people like you come out and share this information, and I'll bet there are millions and millions of people in the world that will value this information, because it's not commonly known about the Anishinaabe and their copper scrolls. And I would really appreciate if you could email me some of this information so that I could, get whatever information you have and go look deeper into it. If you could, my email is on my website. It's very easy, michael@zuluplanet.com. And the answer to your question, why is it difficult to find the answers of ancient civilization, people of North and South America? The same goes for Africa, the ancient peoples of Africa. All that information has been destroyed. This is my take on it. Very maliciously destroyed and consciously destroyed by the conquistadors in the Americas and those that invaded the Americas on behalf of the Pope in the name of God, right? And in South Africa and in Africa, Southern Africa, the same thing. It was the Portuguese and then the British that came afterwards that destroyed all that information, and they brought the missionaries with them, and they converted all the locals into Christianity, and they destroyed all their local knowledge. It's fortunate that the secret movement and the shamanic teachings have kept a lot of that information, by some miracle, have kept that information that's been kept by the indigenous knowledge keepers for thousands of years. And if it wasn't for those, we'd be completely in the dark.
You're absolutely right, Michael. I mean, they systematically go through and burn down the libraries, etc. We were at Disney World a couple of weeks ago on vacation. We just happened to stop by there. But there's a ride called Spaceship Earth, which is right in Epcot, and it takes you around and it shows you the whole history of man, from the caveman to the future. But there's a part where the Library of Alexandria is burned, and then it says, we lost all our knowledge, but luckily some people had kept backups. And we were thinking, no way, that's hogwash. They went in there and systematically burned that information and kept the backups for themselves, and used that to control people.
Yeah. Well, this is why the Sumerian tablets is so important, and I'm sure many of your listeners are very awake and aware to all this stuff. the whole attack and the war on terror in the East has got nothing to do with terrorism, but it's got everything to do with the control of knowledge and information. Thousands and thousands of clay tablets have been confiscated by secret government agents of the United States. The Baghdad Museum was raided within 48 hours of being bombed. All the artifacts and important information was removed from there. And there are a number of people out there that are spreading the information about the importance of some of these tablets that were there and the information that they contained, and also other artifacts that were there that are described as keys. Personally, I haven't really heard anything to that effect, but I think what you're proposing is quite possible and probable. And what we got to look at is how fast the magnetic pole is moving at the moment. It's moving faster than ever before from my latest research. And the guys are just staggered it every year. It moves. I think the latest movement is like it moves about 50 miles per annum or something like that. It's staggering. Or 50 kilometers per annum. It's miles or kilometers now. And that's huge movement of the magnetic pole moving. So the fact that many scientists have said that we are well overdue for a magnetic pole shift, I think that in itself is a very good indicator. And many animals that operate on magnetic radar are affected by this activity to a great deal already. But I think that could also have a lot to do with some of the interesting activity we get from the sun.
Well, what do you make of this blocking out the sun? Because that's essentially what they're doing. Even if you look at the chemtrail patents for the aerosols that they're using, it says it's to block out radiation from the sun. And I remember when I was a child, I used to be able to look at the sun for 3, 4, 5 seconds before my eyes would start to hurt. Now you can't even look at it because it looks as though it's a mirror because of all the chemtrails and barium and aluminum and whatever else they're spraying up there.
Yeah, now this is very fascinating, okay? Because remember the Anunnaki in the translations tell us that they wanted to put some sort of a barrier around their planet, around Nibiru, to protect them against cosmic waves and cosmic frequencies and cosmic rays and so forth.
They did so with chemtrail technology using gold. We're doing the same thing now with other elements.
Yeah, so this is interesting because this is what I tell people in my presentation. We're reaching some sort of a conclusion of an ancient prophecy. Like the end days will be as the first days, and so forth. And this is fascinating stuff. I tell you, it's a lot deeper than people realize. And these giant cycles of the rise and fall of civilizations, I think we're becoming more and more sensitive to this virtually by the day at the moment. And as we're realizing that these rise and falls of civilizations are real events that affected life on this planet and affected people and what they believed in, how they lived, and all these kind of things. But the manipulation of the planet by people with advanced knowledge, it's clear to me that they can control weather with instruments like HAARP. They can control seismic activity. I found, incidentally, another HAARP installation right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And it is spectacular. It is quite staggering and quite frightening when you see this. It's the British Isles, I forget what it is, but I'll put it on my website so that everybody can go and look at it. It's a small, tiny, tiny little island that's filled with military ships and cargo ships that carry all kinds of interesting implements and clearly not a commercial port. And it's a military installation. You can see it's absolutely precisely controlled, and there are several of these hexagonal shaped installations.
And it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder if this weather changes can also be governments at war with each other, weather wars. I've heard that the Russians have this kind of technology, and the Japanese had this technology. Well, so much that they had this technology. They probably don't have it anymore. But do you think that's a possibility?
It could be. I believe that the conflict between the East and West was a maliciously and a consciously created conflict. That it's all the same group of people controlling the world and the planet. But there is certain intervention from outside, and for those that are connected to higher beings and getting messages from higher beings and channeling higher beings, are constantly told about how the beings of light and the Galactic Federation and all these other higher cosmic beings of more higher eternal consciousness levels are trying to help us through all kinds of intervention without physically intervening. I've got a feeling that those that are controlling this world are trying to hold on to it, that are trying to prevent this knowledge and information and intervention of the higher beings and the physical beings that might want to actually come and land on Earth on the lawn of the White House and say, listen, we're here to come and save the world. And what you start seeing at the moment is this very subtle planting in the minds of people that aliens are dangerous, that ETs are evil and they want to come to destroy us and destroy our planet. I watched a program on History Channel a few nights ago called When Aliens Attack, what you should do and how you should prepare yourself for when the aliens arrive to come and destroy our world and take away our freedom and destroy humanity. That's what they're doing very subtly and very cleverly.
Oh, well, even Hawking recently came out and said that we should fear the aliens because they're going to come kill us all.
Yeah, and when you hear people like that, I pity Stephen Hawking. He's clearly a brilliant mind, but very confused and very lost. And that's sad, very sad.
I agree. I completely agree. I think it goes with anything. I mean, you can look at people, and if you look at it on a global scale, we're a pretty bad species. We destroy our planet, we do horrible things, but the majority of us are good, loving people, and I think that goes for any species out there.
And this is very important. This is why I come back, and for those of you that will come to my presentation, you'll see that I end my presentation with a positive message, with a very important positive message, to tell people how we can take back the control. And we take back the control by breaking down the financial systems, breaking down the financial structure, and replacing it with the natural order of things, which I refer to as contributionism, where money does not exist, where people live in absolute harmony without hierarchical systems that allow people to follow their dreams and their passions and their natural given talents by the divine creator, and contribute their natural talents and their natural abilities to the greater benefit of all in their community. It means the decentralization of highly populated areas. It means of unlocking the vaults of possibility, not going back to the cave or back to the Stone Age, but leapfrogging into the future and unlocking the vaults that of secret vaults that have been suppressing free energy and new scientific breakthroughs, and giving people the opportunity to enjoy life, become full spiritual beings and beings of light, and enjoy life to the fullest, because that's what we are here to do. But it is that we've been prevented from doing through the control of the species, through the manipulation of this thing called money. The moment we get rid of money, we break down any possible control of the human race. And it's important for people to think about this. It is the full control that happens through money. And it is not a utopian thought or an idea. It is the natural order of things. And our minds have been so poisoned by the capitalistic model and the so-called democracy and freedom, which are all absolute crap models that have been forced down our throats, and we're so blind that we just suck it up and we believe we're free. Interesting character that Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot interviewed. His name is Pete Peterson. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Pete Peterson, but he's a very interesting guy and quite scary to actually listen to what he has to say. When I say scary, I don't mean scary, but like realize how deep this rabbit hole goes, and how many of these secret projects the government has, and how it's just a never-ending, pit of cover-ups after cover-up after cover-up. And Pete Peterson, incidentally, in his interview, referred to certain things, and then he chose not to answer certain questions because he thought it would get him into trouble. Well, the interview that he did got him into trouble in any case, and he refused to be interviewed after that again, and has seemingly disappeared off the radar. But he's a heavy weight in terms of secret government projects in genetic research, genetic engineering, in the highest level of government, going right up to the secret organizations that control the White House and so forth. And he made it very clear that 80% of our DNA is not of this world, and he says this himself in the interview. And then just recently I read a new paper that was putting, and sorry, let me just come back to Pete Peterson. Incidentally, he was the guy that in the 70s, I think already, it was in the 70s, he started a company called Cyberdyne. And do you remember the company called Cyberdyne? The name should ring a bell with people that are fans of the movie Terminator.
Right.
Exactly, because Cyberdyne was a real company, which was started by Pete Peterson. And guess what Cyberdyne was making? They were making human hybrid robots. Okay, and
Skynet as well.
Exactly. So this is the kind of level that this guy is at. And so when he starts talking to you about this stuff, your hair stands on end when you realize this is all true. All the stuff that's encoded in the movies, as you know, all the knowledge and information that we have is encoded in movies. And this goes back to the Victorian and pre-Victorian Shakespearean theatrical times. Remember that, and this is what blows my mind when you look at Shakespeare's plays, and the research and the results are just getting more and more staggering.
Well, I've got to ask you, we believe in entertaining both sides of the coin and just giving everybody the floor. We had Dr. Michael Heiser on, and he made a pretty good argument as to why some of Zecharia Sitchin's translations are wrong. Have you heard about anything like that, and what would you say to some of his research?
I've heard about Michael Heiser. I haven't really read his work or studied his work. I guess I need to look at that, but I'm happy by looking at some of the translations, and I'm not sure if Heiser is saying that the translations are incorrect or whether his takeout or his interpretations are incorrect. I'm not sure. What did he have to say about that?
That, like, Annunaki doesn't actually mean from those who fell from heaven. He went into some of the semantics of the words and broke them down, but I think he came from a warped perspective, or not a warped, but a skewed perspective, from an agenda-based perspective. So, yeah, I just thought I would get your take on that. But I'm totally in agreement with what you're saying, and a lot of what Zecharia Sitchin says as well, because it makes sense that we were genetically engineered here, because we have so much of our DNA, which is quote-unquote junk DNA. We don't know where it's coming from. Scientists are saying it's junk, but it can't be junk. It's just not of this world.
Yeah, look, and there are a number of mainstream geneticists that have come out and said this. There's this geneticist by the name of Dr. Jiang or Chang, who was involved with the Human Genome Project, and he came out very blatantly and said, this is a number of years ago already, and he had a lot to say about this, actually. People can go and look him up. The Canadian newspaper, The Canadian, wrote a big article about him some time ago, probably about two years ago or so, maybe a bit more. And he, actually probably even more than 2 years ago. And he came out very, very bluntly and said that most of our DNA is not of this world. And this is the guy that works with the Human Genome Project, and he was in charge, based on what the Canadian had to say, he was in charge of the junk DNA division, and looking at the junk DNA and so forth. So, and then there's another interest. Right now, first of all, the information was not gathered by Shakespeare. A lot of people, this information we get told about Shakespeare, but I don't want to get too much into that. The whole Shakespearean era was completely dominated by, and now I have a complete block on the guy's name.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right, Michael. I mean, it's come to the point to where I watch the mainstream media as if it's fiction, and I watch a lot of these movies as if there's a lot of truth there, and it makes me wonder, do they put this information out in front of us just to laugh at us? Are people trying to give us this information to acclimate us to it? Or, I mean, what's going on? Why are they putting this information in these movies? But you're absolutely right. We do see a lot of truth in what quote-unquote science fiction.
Yeah. Francis Bacon is the guy that I was thinking about, Sir Francis Bacon, and he was the guy. I mean, he was a serious player. He wrote and rewrote. He wrote the King James Bible, and there's some interesting clues written into it in one of the Psalms. This is what Jim Mars showed me the other day. In one of the Psalms, Francis Bacon actually codes in the word Shakespeare, broken up into shake and spear, just to show that we're in control. And what the reason you said, what are they doing? Why are they putting this information in the movies, right in front of our eyes? I think that the reason for that is it probably has several answers. The first one is that they need to desensitize us to those ideas, so that when they're not new to us. Secondly, they use it as a form of control, because once they put it into a fictional movie, people will be reluctant to believe that it's true, because you say, oh, it's just a Hollywood movie. You believe in the fiction of Hollywood.
Yes.
That's a very important reason, because once it's a big Hollywood blockbuster, it's going to be very difficult for the mainstream people, the average Joe Schmo on the street, to believe that this is breakthrough, leading-edge scientific secret government projects that are so blatantly, shown to us in movies over the years, over and over again.
Hidden in plain sight.
Well, that's
hidden in plain sight. And then thirdly, the other important thing is that they've got to keep Fantastic. I just heard Chris say that Jim Mars is on the phone, and
yeah.
I was with Jim just two days ago, and we had a great time in Dallas.
Oh, great, cool. Yeah, Dallas is a fun place. It doesn't have as many awake people as Colorado does, or Santa Fe, New Mexico does. You're actually going to be in Santa Fe tomorrow, aren't you?
Yeah, well, we're in Santa Fe right now. I'm talking to you from a wonderful little guest house that we found.
Oh, wonderful.
And we spent the day driving around, just getting ourselves familiarized with the place, and what a great energy this city has got. It's absolutely fantastic. We love it here.
Oh, it really does. We were just there. What happened to my mic? There we go. We were just there last week, and it was gorgeous. And I'm thinking, do I want to live in Denver, or do I want to live over there in Santa Fe? Because it's really beautiful over there. But the Rockies are gorgeous, too. It's got a whole different type of feel to them. Over there, you've got all the mountains with the deserts. Here you have mountains with trees and life, etc. So it's hard to determine which one.
If you want solitude, I think Santa Fe would be the number one choice. But if you want lots of animals and stuff like that, and you want Denver. But what do you think, Michael?
What's nice about Santa Fe for us, it reminds us of some parts of South Africa. So we definitely resonate with it, and the lifestyle here is a lot closer to what we used to at home. So we love it here. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Excellent, excellent. So what are you speaking about there in Santa Fe? I know that we had talked offline a little bit about the lost city of Enkis. And I know that we've been reading about Enkis' laboratory, which was there in South Africa. So do you think that you've actually found the site where his laboratory was?
I believe so, Chris. I believe we have. Obviously, these things are not easy to prove. You need to really dig deep and find many different little pieces of clues and evidence and start pulling those together to string together some sort of a cohesive story and support a theory for this. But we've got enough evidence and enough pieces of the puzzle that certainly point very strongly in that direction. And for now, that's what I believe, and I'll stick to it until somebody proves otherwise.
Well, where's this site located? I'm not really familiar with the South African region, but if I look on the map, about where can I point you?
Well, South Africa is a country at the bottom tip of Africa.
Well, no, I understand that. I mean the site where Enkis city is.
Okay, you would go east. They actually, we've got to first define the whole city, because it's not just a one place. It seems to be scattered across South Africa and Zimbabwe in large sort of large settlements. And when I say large settlements, I mean settlements that are, some of them are 100 miles by 100 miles large. So, these are large settlements. It's larger than any urban area today. And so this is the big surprise, really, that, the whole mystery about Southern Africa is a growing, it keeps growing in mystery, and that's what I find fascinating. The more work and the more research I do, firstly it starts with discovering these millions of stone circles. Well, at first we thought there were just thousands of stone circles, and then we thought there were hundreds of thousands, and then I realized we're actually dealing with millions of circular structures that we didn't know what the origins were. And then when I started looking at some of the telltale signs and the scientific clues, I started realizing that we're dealing with something that's hundreds of thousands of years old, and not just a few thousand years old. And then you start seeing some of the Sumerian translations, and this is very important. This is where Zachariah Sitchin's work starts to become very important. And it's just a great shame that he's no longer among us, because with his huge amount of knowledge and information, I believe he would have been able to recognize many of these sites a lot quicker than I am. So I'm working through his translations and recognizing some of the sites and things that he's referring to, and being able to link those two together. So we're now finding what I believe is the physical proof and the physical evidence for this ancient civilization that was set up by the Sumerian entity Enkis in southern Africa as part of this original gold mining operation on planet Earth. And the mystery